The woman fell to her knees in the dusty street, clutching at the stranger's worn leather chaps. Her voice cracked like drought-parched earth. "Please don't sell me. I'll be your concubine instead." Arthur Callahan stopped mid-step. His weathered hands found her shoulders, lifting her gently from the dirt. The embrace came without thought, protective and sure. "Ma'am, nobody's selling anybody." Ellie Williams trembled against his chest. The educated words she'd practiced in mirrors dissolved into breathless sobs. Around them, Redemption Creek's main street held its breath. Windows shuttered, children disappeared behind doorways. Arthur's gray eyes swept the scene, a debt collector's wagon. Men with guns lounging in shade. The saloon owner, Dutch van der Berk, wringing his hands like a guilty preacher. "What's this about?" Arthur's voice carried the weight of mountains. Dutch stepped forward, his smile thin as paper. "Just business, friend. The girl's got debts to settle." "What debts?" Arthur didn't release Ellie. Her fingers gripped his shirt. "Room and board, protection. Her freedom papers cost me plenty." Dutch's words came rehearsed, smooth as snake oil. "Times are hard. A man's got to collect what he's owed." Ellie's head shook against Arthur's chest. "I've worked every day for 3 years. Kept his books, taught the children. Never asked for nothing but a roof." The truth hung in the air like smoke. Arthur's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before, in different towns with different faces. The promise of freedom that never came. The debt that grew like cancer. A new voice cut through the tension. "We waiting at a church social, Dutch." Micah Bell emerged from the wagon's shade. His smile held no warmth. 3 men flanked him, hands resting on gun belts. Their eyes held the cold calculation of wolves. "Mr. Bell." Dutch's voice cracked. "I was just explaining the situation to this gentleman. Situation's simple." Micah's boots clicked against the boardwalk. "You owe me money. Girl's payment enough." Arthur's body shifted, placing himself between Micah and Ellie. "The lady's not for sale." "Lady?" Micah laughed. "That's rich. You know what she is, Cowboy? A person." Arthur's words cut sharp, same as any other. The street stretched silent. Heat shimmered off dusty ground. Somewhere a dog barked. The church bell chimed noon. Micah's eyes narrowed. "You buying then?" 500 ought to cover Dutch's debts. Arthur's hand moved to his vest pocket. The money felt heavy. Months of planning turned to weight. His ranch fund, his new life. He thought of green pastures and honest work. Ellie's whisper reached him alone. "Don't. Please, I ain't worth it." Arthur looked down at her face. Tears had carved tracks through dust. But her eyes held fire underneath. Intelligence burned there, and pride wounded but not broken. 500. Arthur's voice carried across the street. Dutch's relief was visible. Micah's surprise lasted only moments before greed replaced it. "Cash money?" Arthur nodded. His fingers found the bills, counted them twice. Everything he'd saved, everything he'd planned. Gone for a stranger's freedom. The exchange happened quickly. Money passed hands. Dutch produced a worn paper, signatures and seals making slavery look legal. Arthur took the contract, studied it, then tore it clean in half. "You're free." He handed Ellie the pieces. Micah's smile disappeared. "What did you do that for?" "Contracts fulfilled. Lady's free to go." Arthur's hand rested easy near his gun. "Free?" Micah's voice rose. "You just bought yourself a heap of trouble, Cowboy. Trouble's nothing new." Micah stepped closer. His men shifted, hands moving. To weapons. Girl's got value. Waste of good money, setting her loose. Arthur's eyes never left Micah's face. "My money. My choice." The standoff stretched. Sweat beaded on Dutch's forehead. Ellie pressed closer to Arthur's side. The street remained empty except for them. Finally, Micah laughed. Cold sound in the hot air. Your funeral, friend. But don't think this is over. That girl's caused me considerable inconvenience. He turned to his men. Mount up. We got other business. They climbed into the wagon, wheels creaking protest. Micah's parting words drifted back. See you around, cowboy. You and your investment. The wagon disappeared in dust clouds. Dutch hurried back to his saloon without meeting Arthur's eyes. The street slowly returned to life. Arthur looked down at Ellie. She held the torn contract pieces like broken promises. Thank you. What's your name? Ellie Williams. Arthur Callahan. He touched his hat brim. You got somewhere to go? Her silence was answer enough. Friend of mine runs a place in Valentine. Safe place. You'd be welcome there. Ellie studied his face. Looking for the catch, the price. The moment kindness turned to ownership. Why? Arthur thought of his own chains. Different kind, but chains nonetheless. Everyone deserves choosing their own path. And if I choose to stay with you, then you stay. Your choice, she nodded slowly. I'll need to get my things. We'll need to move fast. Micah's not the forgiving type. They walked toward the saloon together. Arthur's ranch money was gone, but something else had taken its place. Purpose, maybe. Or just the simple knowledge that some things mattered more than dreams. Behind them, dust settled on the street where freedom had been bought and given away in the same breath. Ellie's belongings filled a single worn satchel, 3 dresses, a Bible with pressed flowers, letters from a sister back east. The weight of a life reduced to what hands could carry. Arthur waited by his horse, scanning the horizon. Heat waves danced off distant hills. His fingers worked the reins, muscle memory from years of quick departures. The skill never left, even when a man tried to go straight. Ready? His voice carried urgency disguised as patience. Ellie nodded. She'd changed into traveling clothes, dark fabric that wouldn't show trail dust. Her movements held the careful economy of someone who'd learned to pack light and leave fast. Arthur helped her mount behind him. The contact was brief, necessary. Her hands found his belt, grip uncertain. The horse shifted, sensing the added weight and tension. They rode out of Redemption Creek as the sun reached its cruel peak. Behind them, the town shimmered in heat haze. Ahead lay open country, broken only by rock formations that thrust from earth like ancient prayers. The first hour passed in silence. Arthur's shoulders stayed rigid, eyes constantly moving. Ellie's breathing gradually steadied against his back. The horse's hooves found rhythm on packed dirt. Then the dust cloud appeared. Distance made it small, but Arthur's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough pursuit to recognize the signs. Multiple riders, moving fast. They're coming. He didn't look back. Ellie's grip tightened. How many? Enough. Arthur spurred the horse forward. The animal responded, muscles bunching beneath them. Rocky ground blurred past. Wind whipped at their faces, carrying the taste of sage and fear. The chase stretched across broken country. Arthur's mount was strong but carried double weight. The pursuers gained ground steadily, their shouts echoing off canyon walls. A rifle shot cracked the air. The bullet kicked up dirt to their left. Arthur veered right, toward a narrow canyon mouth. The horse stumbled on loose stone, nearly pitching them both. Hold on. Arthur's voice was steel wrapped in calm. They plunged into the canyon's shadow. Walls rose around them, ancient stone carved by water and time. The passage twisted, hiding them from direct shots, but trapping them in its embrace. Another stumble. The horse's front legs buckled. Arthur felt the animal's strength failing, pushed past endurance. They went down hard, rolling in dust and scattered stones. Arthur hit the ground first, absorbing the impact. Ellie tumbled after, her cry lost in the echo of hoofbeats. The horse struggled to its feet, favoring its left foreleg. Run! Arthur's hand found his revolver. Canyon opens up ahead. Find cover. Ellie stared at him. Blood traced a line down his temple. His shirt was torn, revealing scraped skin underneath. Not without you. I'll be right behind. She didn't move. The sound of pursuit grew louder, bouncing off canyon walls. Arthur's eyes met hers. Something passed between them, unspoken but understood. Together then. Ellie's voice held quiet steel. They ran. The injured horse limped after them, game, but struggling. Behind them, voices echoed in the narrow space. Micah's men had dismounted, following on foot. The canyon opened into a natural amphitheater. Broken boulders offered cover. A thin stream wound through the center, catching afternoon light. Arthur pulled Ellie behind the largest rock formation. Stay low. He checked his ammunition, 6 shots. Not enough if they were determined. Ellie pressed against the stone beside him. Her breathing came fast but controlled. What do they want? Same thing men always want, control. The first pursuer appeared at the canyon mouth. Arthur recognized him from the street. Young, eager to prove himself. The kind who shot first and thought later. Arthur's shot took him in the shoulder. The man spun, crying out, disappearing back into the canyon. Shouts erupted from the hidden passage. Plans changed quickly when blood was drawn. There's another way out. Ellie pointed to where the stream emerged from a crack in the far wall. Water wouldn't flow uphill. Arthur nodded. Smart girl. Education showed in how she read the land. Can you swim? Well enough. They moved during the confusion. The stream was shallow but swift, fed by mountain snow. The crack in the wall opened into a passage barely wide enough for shoulders. Water swirled around their knees. The passage curved, following the stream's ancient path. Behind them, angry voices echoed off stone. Micah's men had found the amphitheater empty. The passage opened onto a meadow. Grass grew thick beside the water. Aspen trees whispered in wind that carried the scent of snow from distant peaks. The sun was lower now, painting everything gold. Arthur helped Ellie from the stream. Water had soaked through her dress, clinging to her form. She wrung out the fabric without complaint, practical as always. There. Arthur pointed to a line of trees. Shelter till dark. They found an abandoned cabin in the grove. The roof had partially collapsed, but 3 walls still stood. A stone fireplace dominated one corner. Wooden floors bore the scars of hard use and harder weather. Arthur checked the structure while Ellie gathered dry wood. The building was sound enough for one night. More importantly, it was hidden from the main trail. No fire until after dark. Arthur settled his back against the wall. Smoke carries. Ellie sat across from him, dress still damp. Her hair had come loose during their escape, framing her face in soft waves. She was beautiful, Arthur realized. Not just pretty, but beautiful in the way of strong things that bent without breaking. Why did you help me? The question came quietly. Arthur was silent for a long moment. Outside, wind moved through aspen leaves. The sound was like rain on distant water. Man's gotta choose who he wants to be. And who do you want to be? Better than I was. Ellie studied his face. The cut on his temple had stopped bleeding, leaving a dark line against weathered skin. His hands rested easy on his knees, but she could see the calluses there. The scars that spoke of violence and hard living. I don't even know you. Her voice held wonder at her own words. You know enough. The silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, but weighted with possibility. Arthur found himself studying her face in return, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she held her chin when thinking, the strength that had carried her through 3 years of false bondage. Valentine's 2 days hard writing. Arthur's voice was careful. My friend Sadie runs a place there, safe place. You'd have work if you wanted it. What kind of work? Honest kind. Teaching, maybe. Town's got children who need learning. Ellie's smile was small but real. I'd like that. Arthur reached into his saddlebag, pulled out jerky and hardtack. Simple food, but it would serve. They ate in companionable silence, listening to the wind and watching light fade from the sky. When darkness finally came, Arthur built a small fire. The flames painted shadows on broken walls. Ellie sat closer now, sharing the warmth. Her dress had dried, but the evening air carried mountain cold. Tell me about Valentine. She kept her voice low. Arthur's eyes reflected firelight. Good town, growing. People there judge by what you do, not what you were. And what were you? The question hung between them. Arthur poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old sins. Nothing worth talking about. Ellie reached across the small space, her fingers brushing his wrist. Everyone's got a past. Arthur looked at her hand on his skin. Small fingers, but strong. Ink stains on her fingertips from keeping Dutch's books. Honest work, even in dishonest circumstances. Some pasts are heavier than others. Then maybe it's time to set them down. Arthur met her eyes. The fire crackled between them. Outside, night sounds filled the forest. An owl called from the darkness. Water whispered over stones. Get some. Rest. Arthur moved to the far wall. Long day tomorrow. But sleep came slowly for both of them. Arthur listened to the night, ears tuned for pursuit. Ellie watched the fire burn low, thinking about freedom and the man who'd bought it for her. With his dreams. Dawn broke gray over the mountains. Arthur woke to find Ellie gone from her place by the dead fire. His hand found his gun before his eyes opened fully. Old habits died hard as winter ground. She sat by the stream, washing her face in the cold. Water, her movements were careful, deliberate. The kind of precision that came from years of making do with little. Arthur approached quietly. She didn't startle. Morning. Sleep well? Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent the night thinking instead of resting. Well enough. They shared the last of the jerky in silence. Arthur watched her hands break the dried meat into small pieces. Efficient, nothing wasted. The careful habits of survival. We should move. Arthur kicked dirt over the fire's remains. Micah's not the type to give up easy. They had no horse now. The animal had wandered off in the night, seeking its own path home. The trail to Valentine stretched ahead on foot, 2 days of hard walking across broken country. Ellie shouldered, her satchel without complaint. Her dress was practical for travel, dark fabric that wouldn't show dust. Her boots were worn but sturdy. She'd prepared for this moment long before it came. The morning passed in steady walking. Arthur set a pace that ate ground without exhausting them. The sun climbed higher, burning off the mountain chill. By midday, sweat traced lines through the dust on their faces. They rested in the shade of a boulder. Arthur studied the back trail while Ellie drank sparingly from their water bottle. No dust clouds, no sign of pursuit. Either Micah had given up or he was being clever about it. You know this country well. Ellie's observation came quietly. Well enough. Arthur's eyes never stopped moving. Traveled through here before. Running from something? Arthur's silence was answer enough. Ellie reached into her satchel, pulled out a folded paper. Arthur's wanted poster. The image was crude but recognizable. The reward amount made Arthur's jaw tighten. Found it in your saddlebag. Her voice held no accusation. Just quiet statement of fact. Arthur took the paper, studied his own face rendered in ink and poor judgment, and $500. Dead or alive. That bother you? Ellie was quiet for a long moment. Wind moved through the rocks around them, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Should it? Most folks would say yes. Most folks haven't spent 3 years in bondage to a man who called himself kind. Arthur folded the poster, tucked it away. It's not who I am now. I know. The simple acceptance hit Arthur harder than accusation would have. He'd expected fear, rejection, the careful distance that came when people learned what he'd been. Instead, Ellie's eyes held the same steady regard as before. How do you know? Man who'd rob and kill doesn't spend his last dollar on a stranger's freedom. They resumed walking. The trail wound through a landscape that seemed carved by some angry god. Rock formations thrust from earth in impossible angles. The sun beat down without mercy, but storm clouds gathered on the horizon. By evening, they'd reached a crossroads. A wooden sign pointed toward Valentine, 20 miles north. Arthur studied the approaching weather. The clouds held the heavy promise of mountain rain. There. Arthur pointed to a cluster of buildings. Ahead, trading post. We can shelter there. The post was larger than it appeared from the trail. A main building housed the store and tavern. Smaller structures served as stables and storage. A few other travelers had sought refuge from the threatening storm. Arthur paid for a room with the last of his coins. The proprietor, a weathered woman with knowing eyes, asked no questions. Money was money, and the storm was coming whether they had a past or not. The room was simple. 2 beds, a washstand, a window that looked out on the darkening sky. Ellie set her satchel on the farther bed, maintaining the careful distance that had marked their travels. Arthur stood by the window, watching lightning flicker in the distance. The storm would be here soon. The kind of mountain tempest that turned trails to rivers and made travel impossible. Arthur. Ellie's voice carried something new. Uncertainty, maybe, or the weight of a decision made. He turned. She stood by her bed, hands folded in front of her. The dying light painted her face in shades of gold and shadow. What you did back there, buying my freedom, that money was important. To you, it was ranch money. Arthur's admission came quietly. My new start, and you gave it up for me. I gave it up for what was right. Ellie moved to the window beside him. Lightning illuminated her face in stark detail. I want to know who you really are. Arthur was quiet for a long moment. Thunder rolled across the mountains, shaking the windows. You sure about that? I'm sure. Arthur sat on the edge of his bed, hands resting on his knees. The words came slowly, pulled from deep places he'd tried to bury. Rode with a gang for 15 years. Dutch van der Linde's boys. The irony of the name wasn't lost on him. Robbed trains, banks, stagecoaches, anything that carried money or goods. Rain began to fall, drumming against the window. Arthur's voice competed with the storm. Killed men who tried to stop us. Told myself it was survival, but that's just pretty words for ugly truth. Ellie listened without judgment. Her face remained calm, attentive. The storm raged outside, but the room felt still, suspended in honesty. Gang fell apart 5 years ago. Dutch got himself killed robbing a federal train. Rest of us scattered. Arthur's fingers worked together, unconscious gesture. Spent the last 5 years trying to earn enough to buy my way into something clean. And now? Now I'm broke and wanted and sitting in a room with a woman who deserves better than either. Thunder crashed directly overhead. The building shuddered. Rain hammered the roof with increasing fury. Ellie moved to sit on her own bed, facing him. You want to know what I see? Arthur met her eyes. I see a man who chose to do right when it mattered. Who spent his last dollar on someone else's freedom. Who's been protecting me since the moment we met. That doesn't change what I was. No, but it shows who you chose to become. A new voice cut through. The storm. Arthur Callahan. Both of them turned. A man stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat. Tall, lean, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades outdoors. A preacher's collar showed beneath his wet jacket. John Marston. Arthur stood slowly. Been a while. 5 years. John stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Heard you were in the area. Arthur's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. Old habits. That right? Easy, Arthur. I'm here as a friend. John's eyes moved to Ellie, then back to Arthur. Got something you need to hear. About Dutch van der Berk and his operation. Arthur's jaw tightened. What about it? He's not just keeping one girl in bondage. John's voice carried the weight of dark knowledge. There's a whole network. Women. Taken under false pretenses. Kept working under fake debt contracts. The room fell silent except for the storm outside. Arthur felt the pieces clicking together. Dutch's smooth explanations. The practiced way he'd handled Ellie's situation. The casual assumption that she was property to be traded. How many? Arthur's voice was flat. Dozen towns, maybe more. All connected, all feeding money up the chain. Ellie stood slowly. Her face had gone pale. The other girls Dutch had working for him. Sarah Mary, that quiet one named Abigail. They all disappeared when their debts came due. Sold to pay other debts. John's confirmation hit the room like thunder. Arthur, you didn't just save one woman. You disrupted a whole system. Arthur looked at Ellie. Her hands were clenched at her sides. The careful composure she'd maintained was cracking, revealing. The rage beneath. They're still out there. Her voice was barely controlled. Other women trapped the same way I was. That's why Micah won't give up. John settled into the room's single chair. You cost them more than money. You cost them the illusion of legitimacy. The storm raged outside, but inside the room, a different kind of tempest was building. Arthur felt the familiar weight of decision, the choice between running and standing, between safety and doing what was right. What are you thinking? Ellie's question came quietly. Arthur looked at both of them. John, who'd found redemption in preaching. Ellie, who'd found strength in surviving. And himself, caught between what he'd been and what he might become. I'm thinking we don't run. To Valentine, Arthur's voice carried new resolve. We go back and end this. The storm passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. Arthur stood in the doorway of the trading post, watching water drip from the eaves. The decision had been made in the dark hours before dawn. They would go to Valentine first, then return to face Dutch's network. John had left before sunrise, riding hard toward the territorial capital. His mission was clear: bring the marshal with federal authority to shut down the operation. Arthur and Ellie would gather evidence, find the other victims, build a case that would hold in court. The borrowed horses were sturdy mountain stock, sure-footed on the muddy trail. Arthur had traded his watch for the animals, the last piece of his old life exchanged for forward motion. The timepiece had been his father's, but some things mattered more than memory. Valentine appeared in the distance by midday. A growing town nestled in a valley, surrounded by green hills and the promise of prosperity. Smoke rose from chimneys. The sound of hammers carried on the wind as new buildings took shape. Sadie Miller's saloon stood at the heart of the main street. The Golden Nugget was larger than most establishments, with a false front painted bright yellow. Windows sparkled in the afternoon sun. A sign promised honest games and fair drinks. Arthur helped Ellie dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. The contact was brief, but charged with unspoken meaning. They'd grown closer during the journey, sharing small confidences in the space between sleep and waking. Arthur Callahan. Sadie's voice boomed from the saloon's entrance. About time you showed your face. She was a woman built for survival, tall and strong with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her dress was simple but clean, her manner direct. The kind of person who judged by actions rather than words. Sody. Arthur touched his hat brim. This is Ellie Williams. Sadie's eyes took in Ellie's travel-worn dress, the careful way she held herself. You're the one John mentioned. Welcome to Valentine. The saloon's interior was warm and inviting. Clean tables, polished bar, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. A few patrons nursed drinks in the afternoon lull. The atmosphere was respectable, family-friendly. Got a room upstairs, Sadie led them toward the stairs. Figured you'd need somewhere to clean up. The room was simple but comfortable. 2 beds, a washstand, a window overlooking the street. Ellie set her satchel on the farther bed, maintaining the careful distance that had marked their travels. Arthur stood by the window, watching the street below. Children played in the dust. Women hung laundry on lines stretched between buildings. Normal life in a normal town. You planning to stay? Sadie's question came from the doorway. Arthur turned. For a while. Good. Town could use a man with your particular skills. Ellie looked between them, reading the subtext. What kind of skills? The kind that keeps honest folks safe. Sadie's explanation was diplomatic. Arthur's jaw tightened. Even here, his reputation preceded him. The past was a shadow that followed wherever he went. I'll let you settle in. Sadie moved to leave, then paused. Dinner's at 6. My treat. The door closed behind her. Arthur and Ellie were alone in the quiet room. Outside, the town continued its daily rhythm. Inside, tension stretched between them. She knows what you were. Ellie's observation came quietly. Most folks do eventually. And they still want you here? Arthur shrugged. Times are changing. Laws come into these parts, but it's not here yet. Towns need protection. Ellie moved to the washstand, began cleaning the trail dust from her hands. What happens after? When the law comes and you're not needed anymore? Arthur had no answer. The future stretched ahead, uncertain as mountain weather. That evening, they ate in the saloon's main room. Sadie served roast beef and potatoes, fresh bread and butter. The food was simple but well prepared. Other patrons nodded respectfully to Arthur, warily to Ellie. You'll want to meet the schoolteacher tomorrow. Sadie refilled Ellie's coffee. Cup. Mrs. Henderson's getting on in years. Could use help with the children. I'd like that. Ellie's smile was genuine. It's been too long since I taught properly. Arthur watched the exchange. Ellie was already finding her place, putting down roots. The thought should have pleased him. Instead, it stirred something restless in his chest. After dinner, they walked the town's main street. Valentine was growing, prosperous. New buildings rose beside old ones. The church was white-painted wood with a tall steeple. The schoolhouse stood nearby, surrounded by a well-tended garden. It's beautiful here. Ellie's voice carried wonder. Peaceful. For now. She looked at him. You think Micah will come here? Men like Micah don't give up easy. They paused before the church. Through the windows they could see the simple interior. Wooden pews, a plain altar, a cross that caught the evening light. The sight stirred something in Arthur's chest, old memories of a different life. Do you believe? Ellie's question came softly. Used to, long time ago. What changed? Arthur thought of the men he'd killed, the pain he'd caused. Hard to believe in salvation when you've done things that can't be undone. John seems to think otherwise. John's a better man than me. Ellie turned to face him fully. You keep saying that. About being better than you are. About not deserving things. When do you stop punishing yourself? Arthur had no answer. The guilt was part of him now, worn smooth by years of carrying it. They returned to the saloon as darkness fell. The evening crowd was larger, but still respectable. A piano player provided gentle music. The atmosphere was warm, welcoming. Arthur noticed Sadie watching them, her expression thoughtful. When their eyes met, she nodded toward the bar. A message passed between them. I'll be right back. Arthur touched Ellie's arm. Order whatever you want. He found Sadie polishing glasses behind the bar. Her movements were automatic, muscle memory from years of the work. Nice girl. Sadie's comment came without preamble. She is. You planning to do right by her? Arthur's hands tightened on the bar rail. What's that supposed to mean? Means she's been through enough. Doesn't need a man who's still running from his past. I'm not running. Then why won't you look at her when she talks about staying? Arthur was quiet. Around them, the saloon continued its evening rhythm. Conversations, laughter, the clink of glasses. Normal sounds of normal people living normal lives. I'm not good for her. Arthur's admission came quietly, that her decision to make. Arthur looked across the room. Ellie sat at their table, hands folded in her lap. She was watching the piano player, her expression peaceful. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked truly at ease. She deserves better. Maybe, but she chose you. Arthur returned to the table, but the conversation with Sadie had unsettled him. Ellie smiled as he sat down, but her eyes held questions he wasn't ready to answer. They retired early, the day's travel catching up with them. Arthur lay in his bed, listening to Ellie's breathing from across the room. The sound was peaceful, rhythmic. The sound of safety, but sleep wouldn't come. Arthur's mind churned with possibilities, dangers, the weight of decisions yet to be made. Outside, the town settled into quiet. Inside, restlessness grew. He rose quietly, moved to the window. The street was empty, except for a lone dog picking through garbage. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light. Can't sleep? Ellie's voice came from the darkness. Arthur turned. She was sitting up in bed, her hair loose around her shoulders. The moonlight painted her face in gentle shadows. Too much thinking. About what? Arthur was quiet for a long moment. About what happens next. What do you want to happen? The question hung between them. Arthur looked at her face, trying to read the expression in the dim light. Hope, maybe. Or just the reflection of his own longing. I want things I don't deserve, such as... Arthur moved to sit on the edge of his bed, facing her. A life, a future, something clean. With me? The words were barely whispered, but they hit Arthur with the force of thunder. He studied her face, looking for doubt, for the fear that should be there. Instead, he found only steady regard. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. Arthur stood, moved to the window again. The town stretched below them, peaceful in the moonlight. A place where people built lives, raised families, found peace. I'm not a good man, Ellie. You're a good enough man. What if I'm not? What if the past catches up and destroys everything we build? Ellie rose from her bed, moved to stand beside him. Her hand found his arm, warm against his skin. Then we'll face it together. Arthur looked down at her face. The moonlight caught the gold flecks in her eyes. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was strong, stronger than he'd ever been. Together? If you'll have me. Arthur's answer came in the form of a kiss. Gentle, tentative, full of promises neither of them was sure they could keep. But in that moment, with the moonlight painting the world silver and the future stretching ahead like an unwritten page, it was enough. 3 days of peace shattered with the arrival of dust clouds on the horizon. Arthur stood in the schoolhouse doorway, watching Ellie work with the children. Her voice carried the patient rhythm of someone born to teach. The scene was everything he'd never dared imagine for himself. The riders appeared at noon. 6 men led by Micah Bell, their horses lathered from hard travel. They moved with the casual confidence of predators in familiar territory. Arthur's hand found his gun without conscious thought. Miss Williams. Arthur's voice cut through the lesson. Children need to go home now. Ellie looked up from the slate board. Her eyes found the window, read the situation instantly. Class dismissed. Walk, don't run. The children filed out with the strange calm of young ones who'd learned to recognize danger. Their feet made no sound on the dusty street. By the time Micah's group reached the schoolhouse, only Arthur and Ellie remained. Micah dismounted slowly, his smile cold as winter stone. Thought you'd run further than this, cowboy. Far enough. Arthur stepped into the street. What do you want? Same thing I wanted back in Redemption Creek. What's mine? Arthur's eyes swept the group. Young men mostly, the kind who hired their guns to whoever paid best. Only one showed real seasoning. The others were dangerous but untested. Nothing here belongs to you. That's where you're wrong. Micah's voice carried false reasonableness. See, you cost me considerable money. Time to settle accounts. Ellie moved to stand beside Arthur. Her chin was raised, backbone straight. I'm not going anywhere with you. Lady doesn't have a choice in the matter. She does now. Arthur's voice was quiet steel. Suggest you mount up and ride out. Micah's laugh echoed off the buildings. Or what? You'll shoot us all? 6 against 1, cowboy. Even you ain't that good. He's not alone. Sadie's voice came from behind them. Arthur turned. Sadie stood in the saloon doorway, shotgun cradled in her arms. Behind her, other townspeople emerged from doorways and windows. The blacksmith held a hammer. The storekeeper carried a rifle. Even old Mrs. Henderson clutched a rolling pin. This is our town. Sadie's words carried the weight of community decision. We don't take kindly to threats. Micah's confidence flickered. He'd expected to face one man, not an entire settlement. His eyes swept the gathering crowd, calculating odds that had suddenly shifted. You can't protect her forever. Micah's voice held forced calm. I got time, do you? John's voice came from the far end of the street. The preacher approached. On horseback, but he wasn't alone. A man in a federal marshal's badge rode beside him. Behind them came a small cavalry unit, blue uniform stark against the dusty street. Marshal Thompson. John's introduction was formal. This is Micah Bell. The marshal studied Micah with the cold assessment of a lawman who'd seen too much. You're under arrest for human trafficking and extortion. On whose authority? Federal authority. We've got warrants for you and your whole network. Arthur felt the pieces clicking together. John hadn't just gone for help. He'd built a case, gathered evidence, brought the full weight of law to bear. You got nothing on me. Micah's protest lacked conviction. We got plenty. The marshal's voice was flat. Dutch van der Berk sang loud when we arrested him. Named names, gave locations, provided documentation. Micah's men shifted nervously. The odds had gone from favorable to impossible in the space of heartbeats. Their leader's confidence cracked visibly. This ain't over. Micah's voice carried venom. You think the law's gonna protect you forever? Long enough. Arthur's reply was quiet certainty. The arrest happened quickly. Micah's men surrendered without resistance when faced with federal authority. Only their leader fought the shackles, spitting curses that echoed off the buildings. We'll need statements from both of you. Marshal Thompson's request was polite, but firm. Evidence for the trial, Arthur nodded. Whatever you need. The marshal's eyes moved to Ellie. Miss, you're safe now. Networks broken, leaders arrested. Other victims are being freed as we speak. Ellie's composure finally cracked. Tears traced silent paths down her cheeks. Arthur's arm found her shoulders, offering solid comfort in a world that had suddenly become less dangerous. The crowd dispersed gradually, excitement fading to relief. Children emerged from hiding places, drawn by the universal fascination with authority figures. The town's rhythm slowly returned to normal. Drink? Sadie's invitation included both of them. The saloon was busier than usual, filled with townspeople discussing the morning's events. Arthur found himself accepting congratulations, handshakes, the kind of recognition he'd never expected to receive. You did good. Sadie's words came quietly. Both of you. Arthur looked at Ellie, who was surrounded by the other women. They fussed over her, offered comfort, spoke in the hushed tones reserved for those who'd survived ordeals. She belonged here, had found her place in the community. What happens now? Arthur's question came from somewhere deeper than conscious. Thought, now you decide what kind of man you want to be. Sadie's answer was simple. Past behind you, future's ahead. What you do with it is up to you. Arthur considered her words. The wanted posters would still exist, but federal intervention had changed his status. John had mentioned possible clemency, a clean slate in exchange for cooperation. Marshall wants to offer you a job. Sadie's revelation came casually. Deputy. Position. Official badge. Legitimate authority. Arthur's hands tightened on his glass. Why? Because you know how criminals think. Because you've got the skills to track them. Because you chose to do right when it mattered. The offer hung between them. Arthur looked across the room at Ellie, who was demonstrating letters to a group of fascinated children. Her voice carried the patient rhythm of someone who'd found her calling. What about her? What about her? Girl's got a job teaching, friends who care about her, a community that accepts her. Question is whether you're planning to be part of that community or just passing through. Arthur finished his drink, set the glass down carefully. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. Good opportunities don't wait forever. That evening, Arthur and Ellie walked the town's quiet streets. The crisis had passed, leaving them alone with questions that had no easy answers. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but full of possibility. The marshal offered me a job. Arthur's words came quietly. Here in Valentine? Here in Valentine. Ellie stopped walking. They stood beneath a street lamp, its light painting them in warm circles. What did you tell him? That I'd think about it. What's to think about? Arthur looked at her face, trying to read the expression in the lamplight. You sure you want to be tied to someone with my history? I'm sure I want to be tied to the man who saved my life, who gave up his dreams for my freedom, who chose to stand and fight instead of running. Arthur's hands found her face, thumbs tracing the lines of her cheekbones. I love you. I love you too. The words hung between them, simple and profound. Around them, the town settled into evening quiet. Inside the saloon, a piano played gentle music. Somewhere a dog barked. The ordinary sounds of ordinary people living ordinary lives. So you'll take the job? Ellie's question came softly. Arthur's answer came in the form of a kiss, deeper than before, full of promises they were both ready to keep. When they separated, his forehead rested against hers. I'll take the job. Good. Ellie's smile was radiant. Valentine needs a good lawman. And what does Valentine need from you? A good teacher. Someone to help children learn and grow. Someone to build a future one lesson at a time. Arthur stepped back, took her hands in his. Miss Williams, would you consider staying in Valentine permanently? Are you asking me to marry you, Mr. Callahan? I'm asking if you'd consider it. Ellie's laugh was pure joy. I'd consider it very seriously. They walked home through streets that had become theirs. The schoolhouse where Ellie would teach, the marshal's office where Arthur would work, the church where they might marry, the saloon where they'd found friendship. A life built on solid ground, rooted in community and mutual respect. Not the life either of them had planned, but the life they'd chosen together. The past was behind them. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but hopeful. And in the space between what was and what could be, love had found a way to flourish. 6 months passed with the steady rhythm of honest work. Arthur wore his deputy badge with the same quiet dignity he'd once carried his gun. The star caught morning light as he walked his rounds, checking on storekeepers, nodding to children heading to school. The marshal's office had become his second home. Wanted posters covered one wall, but Arthur's face no longer appeared among them. Federal clemency had wiped his slate clean in exchange for testimony that put Dutch's entire network behind bars. Ellie's schoolhouse filled with the sound of learning. 23 children now, ranging from 6 to 16. Former slaves and their children sat beside ranchers' kids, all united in the democracy of education. Her voice carried the patient authority of someone who'd found her calling. The town had grown around them. New buildings rose monthly. The railroad was coming, bringing prosperity and change. Valentine was becoming something more than a frontier settlement. It was becoming home. Arthur finished his morning rounds and headed toward the schoolhouse. Through the windows he could see Ellie at the blackboard, explaining mathematics to a group of attentive faces. The sight never failed to stir something deep in his chest. Deputy Callahan, young Tommy Peterson, ran up, breathless with excitement. "Ma says to tell you the preacher's here." Arthur nodded his thanks. John had arrived the night before, travel-worn but smiling. Today was the day they'd all been waiting for. The church was fuller than usual for a weekday afternoon. Townspeople had closed their businesses, gathered to witness something rare in their hard country. A wedding built on love rather than necessity. Arthur stood at the altar, hands clasped behind his back. His suit was new, purchased from the general store with his first month's wages. The fabric was stiff, unfamiliar, but he wore it with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything. Sadie sat in the front pew, her daughter beside her. The girl had grown in the months since Micah's arrest, no longer afraid of every shadow. Other faces filled the remaining seats. The blacksmith and his wife, Mrs. Henderson, now retired but still sharp. Marshall Thompson, who'd become both boss and friend. The church doors opened. Ellie appeared in the doorway, wearing a dress of soft blue fabric that brought out the gold in her eyes. She'd sewn it herself, working by lamplight in the evenings after school. The simplicity made her more beautiful, not less. She walked down the aisle alone, as she'd chosen to do. No father to give her away, no family to approve the match. Just her own decision, made freely and without reservation. Arthur watched her approach, memorizing every detail. The way sunlight caught her hair, the small smile that played at her lips, the steady confidence in her step. She was choosing him, as he'd chosen her, in front of God and community. John's voice filled the church, reading words that had bound couples for generations. Love and honor, sickness and health, better and worse. The promises carried weight in a place where life was hard and commitment meant survival. "Do you, Arthur Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Arthur's voice was steady. "I do. Do you, Ellie Williams, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Her words carried the same quiet certainty that had marked their journey together. The rings were simple bands of gold, purchased with money earned through honest work. Arthur slipped the band onto Ellie's finger, his hand steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss was gentle, reverent, witnessed by people who'd become family. When they separated, Arthur's forehead rested against Ellie's, the same gesture that had marked their growing love, now sealed in law and promise. The reception was held in the saloon, transformed for the occasion. Tables groaned under food contributed by every family in town. Music filled the air, provided by a fiddle player who traveled from the next county. Children ran between the tables, their laughter mixing with adult conversation. Arthur found himself accepting congratulations, handshakes, the kind of recognition he'd never expected to receive. These people had seen him at his worst and chosen to embrace his best. The acceptance was a gift he'd never stopped treasuring. Speech. Someone called from the crowd. Others took up the chant. Speech. Arthur stood slowly, uncomfortable with the attention, but unwilling to disappoint. The room gradually quieted, faces turning toward him expectantly. "Most of you know what I was before I came here." Arthur's voice carried clearly. Some of you might wonder why you should celebrate a man like me finding happiness. He paused, looking around the room. These faces had become familiar, trusted. Truth is, I wondered the same thing. Didn't think I deserved a second chance, much less a good woman and a community that accepts me. Ellie's hand found his, squeezing gently. But Ellie taught me something. She taught me that we're not defined by our worst moments, but by what we choose to do after them. Arthur's eyes found his wife's face. She chose to trust when trust was dangerous, chose to love when love was risky, chose to build a life when everything around her was falling apart. The room was silent, listening. I'm not the man I was 6 months ago. But I'm not the man I'll be 6 months from now either. We're all becoming something better, one choice at a time. Arthur raised his glass. To second chances, to communities that forgive, to love that transforms, and to the woman who saved my life by letting me save hers. The toast was heartfelt, genuine. Glasses clinked. Conversations resumed, but something had shifted in the room. Arthur had spoken truth, and truth had a way of binding people together. Later, as the celebration wound down, Arthur and Ellie found themselves alone on the saloon's porch. The town stretched before them, quiet in the evening light. Their town now, their life together. Any regrets? Arthur's question came softly. About what? Tying yourself to a man with my history. Ellie turned to face him fully. Arthur Callahan, you listened to me. You gave up everything for my freedom. You chose to stand and fight when you could have run. You built a life based on service and sacrifice. If that's not worth loving, I don't know what is. Arthur's hands found her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. I love you, Mrs. Callahan. I love you too, Deputy Callahan. They stood together, watching their town settle into evening quiet. The schoolhouse where Ellie would return Monday morning. The marshal's office where Arthur would continue his work. The church where they'd promised to love each other for better or worse. A life built on solid ground, rooted in community and mutual respect. Not the life either of them had planned, but the life they'd chosen together. The past was behind them, lessons learned but not chains to drag. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but hopeful. And in the space between what was and what could be, love had found a way to flourish. Arthur's arms encircled his wife, holding her close as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The same protective gesture that had marked their first meeting, now transformed into something deeper. Not protection from danger, but the shelter of home. They'd both been broken when they met. Shaped by trauma, defined by survival, carrying wounds that might never fully heal. But they'd chosen to heal together, to build something beautiful from the pieces of their shattered lives. The town around them continued its quiet evening rhythm. Children called in from play. Lamps flickered to life in windows. The ordinary sounds of ordinary people living ordinary lives. But for Arthur and Ellie, there was nothing ordinary about it. They'd found love in the midst of chaos, hope in the face of despair, redemption in the simple act of choosing each other every day. The circle was complete. The desperate embrace that had begun their story had become the loving embrace that would define their future. From strangers thrown together by circumstance to partners united by choice. In the growing darkness, with stars beginning to shine overhead, Arthur and Ellie Callahan held each other close and looked toward tomorrow. Together, they were home. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.